This happened 3 years ago when I had just moved to San Francisco for college. I was 21 years old at the time and had just moved to the Bay Area from a very safe and very small town in Europe. It was pretty late, maybe about 1 a.m. if I had to guess, and I was coming back from a house party in San Francisco. At the time, I was living a little outside the city close to the airport, so I figured I would take the train to the airport and then catch a cab home from there, so that I wouldn't have to spend too much money. I was all by myself and wearing a dress and heels, and I was even a little tipsy from the party. I took the Bay Area rapid trains into the airport, and when I got off, I got a little lost inside of the airport, and I couldn't find the exit. What I did find was one of those little airport trains, air trains, and I thought maybe if I got on that, it would take me to the main exit and entrance. I got on the little train and started moving, and I immediately regretted getting on. The train was completely empty, except for me and a bald man who was probably in his mid to late 30s. The man had started talking to me, asking me what I was doing there, was I a student, where was I from, did I have a boyfriend, and even asking for my phone number. I was a little nervous because I wasn't used to older men randomly starting up conversations with me, but I stayed friendly and answered his questions. I even gave him my phone number, figuring I could just ignore him if he ever called me. I felt pretty uncomfortable though. The train eventually stopped, and when we got off, I realized that taking the air train had been a big mistake. It had dropped us off somewhere outside on the other end of the airport, and there was nothing around us but darkness. No people, no lights, only dark buildings and nothing else. I started walking towards the main entrance, but it was pretty far away. I was walking fast, but the man caught up with me. We were literally the only people there, walking alone in the dark. I was pretty creeped out by then. He starts telling me that I shouldn't be out by myself and that it's dangerous, and then he pulls out a huge knife. My heart started racing and I couldn't believe this was happening. He shows me the knife and he tells me that it's so dangerous out here and that he has to protect himself. I don't even remember how I reacted. I think I just nodded and said, "Ah, okay," and then just started walking a little faster. How the hell did he think I was going to react to that? We're all alone in the dark and he pulls out a knife on me? My heart racing, I finally reached the main entrance of the airport and got in a cab right away without another word to the man. Thank God nothing happened, but I was honestly very, very scared. Thinking back still gives me the creeps. When I laid in bed that night, still very much creeped out, my phone vibrated. He had sent me a dick pic. Okay, so this could have been nothing, but something about it felt so off. Some backstory. So last night, my sister had somewhat of an emergency, and she asked if I would come stay the night with her. She lives 3 hours away from me. I packed my bags right away and headed there at 9 p.m. As I was about an hour away from my apartment, I realized that my car wasn't going to make it. The temp gauge was rising and I didn't want to risk it overheating in the middle of nowhere. So I turned around, and when I'm about 15 minutes from my home, my car overheats. At this point, it's about 11:30 p.m. I pulled off at an exit and waited for it to cool down, then got back on the highway, but it did it again, so then I pulled off into the side of the highway. As I'm waiting for it to cool down, I tried to start it again and it wouldn't start at all. I'm a 23-year-old female all alone, new to town, and my boyfriend was out of town. So I start to panic a little because I've read way too many damn scary stories. I managed to calm down and I had called my stepdad to let him know where I was and that I was going to call a tow truck. As I was on the phone with them, 2 cars pulled off the highway right in front of me and then one right behind me. My first thought was that they were going to help me or that they were all traveling together and needed to stop. But it was really weird to me that they had pulled off at the same spot I did, with one pulling behind me. They all sat in their cars for what felt like forever, but was probably around 3 minutes. Then a man got out of one of the cars in front of me and had started walking toward my car. He walked to the passenger side, stopped for 1 second, and then walked to the car behind me. This whole time I'm describing what he looks like to my stepdad just in case. He was then in that car for a good while, walked back towards my car, and he was passing my window, hit it with his knuckle, knocking once as he kept walking. Then he just sat there for a while, and then they all left at once. I'm realizing as I'm typing this that this doesn't seem that weird, but being alone on the highway with 3 cars pulled off in front of you and behind you is a suffocating feeling, and I really didn't understand why he felt the need to knock on my window as he was walking by. I'm not gonna lie, it made me cry because it was just so bizarre. What were they planning? I'm hoping they were just pulled off to talk to each other and I was just overreacting. I was once stranded in Atlanta, Georgia. Here's what happened. I was 22 living outside of Charleston, South Carolina, and I had just wrecked my car, then subsequently got fired from my job for lack of reliable transportation. Needless to say, I had some free time on my hands, so I decided to use what I had in savings to go spend some time with my grandparents in Louisiana and help them out with the things that they could no longer keep up with. I decided to take a bus since it was only $100 and go on my own. Fearless female never had a situation where I didn't feel comfortable. Not to mention, I only had one change of buses in downtown Atlanta. I get to the interchange of buses and wait in line. Get all the way to the gentleman checking the tickets, and he notices that I'm supposed to have luggage. Silly girl used to taking airplanes laughed and made a quip about them not doing it for me, then went back to retrieve my suitcase. I have to get back in line, finally get up to the same man who had just checked my ticket before, and he says, "Sorry ma'am, the bus is full." I'm rightfully confused and angry that he's not even looking at me to realize that he had just sent me back out of line and not counted me in, so I threw a fit to no avail. I had no choice but to wait for the next bus. So there I am alone at midnight, and the next bus didn't come until 8 a.m. the next morning. Still fuming, I decided to go outside to one of the designated smoking areas. Since you couldn't smoke directly in front of the building, I had to go about 20 to 30 yards to the left side of the entrance. No big deal, plenty of people outside, so I didn't feel any threat. I sat down against the wall, lit a cigarette, and had started reading a book. A man came over and sat down next to me with reasonable space between us and had started making small talk. No harm. I was polite and started engaging in conversation. Somewhere in this conversation, it came up that he and I shared the same birthday. He showed me his ID to prove it. I wish now that I had paid more attention to the details, as it would have been helpful in identifying him later on. I go back inside, spend a little while in there, and come back out to do it all over again. I sat down and he came back. Several times this happened. I just figured he thought I was nice and enjoyed the conversation with the stranger who was bored at the station and had plenty of time to kill. The last time I went out, true to form, he comes outside and sits next to me, a little closer this time. He starts telling me how he feels we have a connection, that we must be soulmates, and since we share a birthday, he feels extremely close to me and extremely attracted to me. I'm not interested in him though, and I simply reply back with, "Thank you, that's really sweet, but I'm just passing through." I turned my head in the opposite direction, as I'm hoping it doesn't turn into something else that's even more uncomfortable. I should note that at this point it is well into the night, maybe 3 or 4 a.m., and what was a space filled with people has dwindled down to just a handful, and most of them are at the service station that's across the street. The man grabs my arm, holds me as tight as he can, and I hear him unzip his pants. When I struggled to get away, he wrapped his entire arm around my shoulders and neck, and he pulls me into him while he jerks himself off. I struggle to get free, and I start screaming as much as I can with his arm tied around my neck, and only then do people across the street realize something is wrong and start running over. The man finally lets go, jumps up, and runs back behind the station and into the alley, and then 2 men come to me while another races after him, but loses him after an alley. I tell them what happened, and one of them ran into the station and had one of the security officers come out to help. I give them the best description of the man that I can muster. 5 to 10 minutes each cigarette break over the course of several hours proved unhelpful, and they weren't able to identify the man. They escorted me inside, where I sat down in line by 2 adult military men who were getting on the same bus to surprise their mother with a visit home. I didn't go out to smoke another cigarette for the rest of the night. I haven't taken a bus since, and what was usually no big deal to talk to a stranger in a public place, well, has now turned into an all-out panic attack if any male sits too close to me. It's been about 6 years, and I still have issues with men approaching me, asking anything about myself, even if I'm not alone. I visibly shake, lose color in my face, and I even hate the sound of zippers. Yeah, it's that serious. I'll preface this by saying that this creepy incident happened at the start of 2004 when my family was on camp. I was 12 at the time, and my best friend had come with us. The camp at that point had been largely uneventful until all of that changed. One evening, my mother was in the kitchen area / TV room, while me, my friend, and I were taking a shower in the bathroom block next door. The showers were structured so their concrete walls didn't go all the way down, and there were these gutters taking the water to the drains outside, so our feet were visible to anyone who went behind the shower block. It backed into a fence around the back of the camp, so no one would go back there unless there was a good reason, like the camp's maintenance staff, etc. Well, during the shower, we could hear this cackling laughter coming from outside the block right behind us, and it sounded just like a teenage boy. I was confused as to where it was coming from, and I asked my friend if she heard it too, and she said yes, equally as baffled. Then shockingly, a head had appeared from under the shower in the gap at the bottom, and this teenage guy was staring right up at me while grinning while I stood naked and terrified in the shower. I let out an almighty scream, jumped from the shower, wrapped a towel around myself, and just kept screaming until my mother came rushing in, and I managed to explain through my tears what had happened. My mother had waited until my friend and I had dressed and went running back with us to the tent and then told my dad what happened. Well, he told her to inform the camp staff while he grabbed a kayak paddle and went around the shower block to find the teenage idiot, unbelievably still crouched down the back of the wall. After that, we could hear the boy screaming, and he suddenly went sprinting past our tent at the speed of light, while my dad was hot on his heels waving the paddle menacingly until he chased him all the way out of the campgrounds and out of sight. The creep never returned, and the camp management said there had been a few incidents logged where a young guy was looking at girls and women in the shower block. The manager also said that it was very likely this creep wasn't even staying in the campgrounds, which made it even more terrifying. Before I got my car in my freshman year of college, I would use Lyft to get to work pretty much every day during the summer. During the winter and fall, I just walked, even at night. And in all those Lyft cars and drivers, I never had any noticeable encounters. I've probably been in a couple hundred by now, and aside from the occasional political opinion and speeder, it was all fine. One day I ordered a Lyft car like normal. It'll be here in 7 minutes. Cool. I walk outside a couple of minutes early to go and wait for my driver, and I see a vehicle that pretty much matches the description of mine sitting in my driveway. You know that little car icon next to the profile that you can use to compare to the real one? It was the same color, same size, and unless you notice the little details, it pretty much looked the same, but my driver was still 2 minutes away. I choose to ignore him, thinking it's just a funny coincidence, and maybe he's a friend of a neighbor or something. But then he rolls down his window and looks at me, so I go up to talk to him. Maybe he's just lost? And by the way, he's a different race entirely from my actual driver, so I know for sure this isn't him, but similar skin tones and age. He tells me that he's my driver, and he pulls out his phone that has my profile, like how your driver has to make sure it's you. So in my naive and innocent teenage mind, I think to myself, oh, Lyft must have accidentally sent me 2 drivers, and I tell him that he's not the driver I was told I would meet. Right as we were talking, my actual driver pulled up and rolled down his window. I explained the situation, and I said that I'll probably get in the first guy's car because he was here first. Then my actual driver said I should probably go with whoever's on my phone. That sounded pretty logical to me, and it made sense. But before I could turn around and tell the other guy that I was going to go ahead and pick the other guy, he drove off. Tinted windows, by the way. It wasn't until I got into the car that my driver brought it to my attention how freaking weird that was. He told me in his 10 years of being a Lyft driver, nothing like that has ever happened to him or anyone he knew. Then it suddenly dawned on me about what might have happened. The similar car appearance to my actual driver, and the fact that he had my info but I didn't have his. The fact that he was there a couple of minutes early, so that if I did get in, it wouldn't have intercepted my real driver. Everything. And I almost got into his car. I went to work and I was totally shaken up over it. I tried making a report to Lyft, but without any evidence or information other than a basic physical description, there really wasn't much I could do. My Lyft driver said he would go ahead and tell the story to some of the other driver friends on a social media forum so they can spread the word. So that makes me feel a little better. That driver might have saved my life. I think about it a lot. Oh, and hey, my dad heard all about it and he got me a car. So at least I got something other than trauma. I've also only told a couple of people in real life due to the traumatic and scary nature of the whole thing. Looking back on it now, it was most likely a trafficker or kidnapper. These guys probably have access to Lyft servers and they look for repeat customers like me. I've since deleted the app in my account. Always check the license plates. About 5 or so years ago, I was 23 at the time, and I had just gotten out of my first and only serious relationship a year prior. That guy was my first love and my first sexual experience, and so needless to say, when things ended and he had zero interest in trying to work things out, I was heartbroken. After about a year of moping and being stupidly sexually promiscuous, I decided to try actual dating. I met this guy Rick on a dating website. He was a couple of years older than me, was an ex-Marine, was cute, and really good at making conversation. After a few days of talking online, he had asked for my number, and we decided to meet up. I drove to his house, and came to find out he lived with a few other guys who looked really shady. Now, he actually lived in a good neighborhood, but the way they kept their home and the way his roommates looked was my first red flag that an inexperienced, naive girl would not fit in his crowd. But I decided to stay and give it a chance. Once he saw me, he came up, gave me a hug, and he handed me a helmet to his motorcycle. Now, I've never in my life rode a motorcycle before, but I'd always wanted to, so I thought why not, and I hopped on. Now, the street that he decides to take me up is known to be a very long and winding road that is pretty secluded. It's also important to note that this is the springtime, and it's about 5 p.m. when we go on our ride. I didn't realize at the time that he had decided to take me on that specific road, but once we got on it, my red flags really started to kick in. I began to realize that 1, it's dead silent and there are no other cars on this road right now, and 2, it's starting to get dark out, and 3, yeah, I don't know this guy, so what the hell am I doing? And my alarm bells start ringing. Now, I will say that while I made a ton of mistakes within this story, this instance is where I'm really proud of how I reacted. Once my anxiety kicked in, I told him that I think we should turn around and go home. He had started laughing and he asked if I was scared, and I said no, I just need to head home because my parents are expecting me for dinner soon. He kept riding forward, more alarm bells ringing. Pictures of me being assaulted and lying dead in a ditch came up in my mind. I kept asking him, can we please turn back? Can we please turn back? And he finally gave in and turned around. The next day came, and I told myself that maybe I was just overreacting and he really was harmless, and I decided to agree on a second date a few days later. We met up at a sports bar for dinner and a couple of beers so we could watch the hockey game. The entire time we're sitting there, Rick has his arm around me and has me literally attached to his hip, constantly trying to make out with me and is acting extremely possessive. At this point, I'm completely freaked out because I barely know this guy, and all he's talking to me about is our future and how he would be such a protective boyfriend because he was an ex-Marine. At this point, I just knew I was done with them, but unfortunately, my car's at his house. When we're finally done and head home, he then insists that I come inside and hang out for a bit. I decided to walk in and just stay for 5 minutes. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. We walk into his room and he immediately pounces on me, making out with me and trying to fill me up. I kept pushing his hands away from me and kept telling him that I needed to get going, but I could tell that he wasn't going to give up until he got what he wanted, especially after I realized his little friend was aroused. He told me that he wouldn't let me leave until we did something. I had no idea what he would have forced me to do if I kept rejecting his advances, so I decided that my only way out of there was to finish him off. So I did. And the entire time, I'm really trying to act like I'm enjoying it while I'm really dying inside and hoping he would hurry up and finish so I can quickly leave. Luckily, I only used my hands, and luckily it only took him a few minutes to finish before I literally ran out of the door and sped home. After that night, he had tried to ask me to hang out again, and I told him that I think it would be best if we just stayed friends. This guy began to relentlessly call me and text me and beg me to see him, then proceeded to insult me because I was ignoring him, and then he would apologize for insulting me, saying it was just because he liked me so much. So I blocked him. Then he tried to message me on Instagram, so I blocked him there, and then on Facebook, and finally on Snapchat as well. This is the first time I've ever posted on Reddit. I keep reading all these dating horror stories, and it being Valentine's Day and all, it had me recall a nearly forgotten first date with a guy my friend Mark had fixed me up with. I had known the guy a little bit because he worked with my friend at a local music store. He seemed cool and he was actually pretty good looking. The first time we met was at an ICP concert that we had all attended. The guy who we'll call Mike was pretty normal on the surface, and through Mark he got my number and called me. We went out on a date, and as the night drew on, he asked if I minded if we just go hang out at the local park and chat, because we had been at a super busy loud bar that had a band playing. I was 19 and highly stupid back then, so I agreed. It was in the summer and it wasn't yet dark, so I wasn't thinking it seemed weird. As we were chatting, he leaned in and kissed me, and I looked around realizing it had gotten really dark. I'm in heaven because at this point he hasn't given me any reason to think he's a creeper. We had a great night. He was really charming and funny, and we had a ton in common. Then after our first kiss, he gets this creepy grin. He looks out the window and then says to me, "I'm taking you in those woods, and we're gonna have a really good time." I kinda laugh a bit nervously, because at the time I hadn't yet lost my virginity. I tell him I'd rather stay in the car. He gets weird and angry, and it's like he's two different people. "Why can't we just go into the woods? I promise I won't kill you." By now he's trying to laugh it off, but I had gotten incredibly creeped out. I tried to play it off like I'm not ready to run away. I should have been more creeped out than I was, but I was so naive. It creeps me out now writing this. He looks at me again, and he leans back in his seat and begins to start fake whining. "Oh, come on. Let me just take you into the woods. It'll be fun." I'm having none of this, and I start getting mad, and I tell him I'm ready to go home. I finally talked him into just taking me home. He was oddly quiet the rest of the drive home, and then as he gets to my house, he proceeds to apologize profusely about it. I heard later from my friend Mark that he said I was a tease. Well, when I told my friend about what happened, he completely stopped talking to Mike. Said that he heard that he could be a real sex maniac. How about borderline psycho? The story happened around 2018. My girlfriend Jill and I at the time had made friends with a married couple around our age the previous year, and we would regularly get together with them most weekends to hang out, drink, and sometimes even smoke weed. Let's call them Delilah and Tom. The wife, let's call her Delilah, had suffered for several years from a combination of anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorder, and also some painful physical conditions that made just getting through each day a struggle. We really tried our best to be supportive, but one day when none of us were around, she attempted to end her own life. I don't want to go into any details out of respect, but luckily she survived. She knew at that point that therapists and pills were not going to keep her safe from herself anymore, and that she needed to take drastic action. So after discussing it with her husband, she decided that it was absolutely necessary that she admit herself into the local psych ward to prevent any more self-harm. We of course all showed our support during her stay there, and we were very relieved when she was discharged a few weeks later. We had visited her a few times, but visits were very limited because the facility only gives family and friends an hour visit and is very strict about patient schedules and limiting face-to-face contact out of concerns of everyone's safety. She seemed to be very positive and upbeat during the visits, and since she was a writer/author for work and as a hobby, she couldn't wait to write her own Girl Interrupted story about her time in the ward. When Delilah came home after being discharged, she wouldn't stop talking about a new friend that she had made in the ward. Let's call him Rob. Rob soon took center stage in the events that followed, and as soon as he entered the picture, things took a very dark turn. Delilah told us that during her time in the ward, she met Rob and he had sort of took her under his wing. He was not new to the psych ward, and he was in and out of them for a combination of personality disorders and severe alcoholism. For some reason, he really took a liking to Delilah, and she went so far as to say he was the only person at the ward that was able to snap her out of her delusions and back into reality. When she said this, me, Jill, and Tom were a little skeptical and concerned that Delilah had allowed another patient to help her in that way, but we're grateful that whatever he did seemed to have helped. Delilah said that Rob was also about to be discharged and he was going to be homeless, and he needed a temporary place to stay. She wanted Tom to allow Rob to live with them for a little while, at least until he got back on his feet. Tom was, of course, very skeptical about this, but after several days of discussing it and wanting to do her friend a favor, Tom agreed. Jill and I couldn't believe that they were letting a psych patient with severe alcoholism who Delilah had only known for a few weeks actually live with them. When we first met Rob, who had moved in with nothing more than a guitar, a few clothes, and a few other odds and ends, I immediately noticed that he was unlike anyone I'd ever met in my entire life. He was a somewhat disheveled man with a scraggly beard and a wild mess of hair that looked unwashed. He was constantly drinking hard liquor and often slurred his words. He soon began to share the details of his past and present, and Jill and I were dumbfounded at the stories he shared. His stories were so over the top and incredible that I honestly thought he was either delusional or he was just making up stories for attention. He told us that he was in a rock band that had opened for some very famous rock bands, and he mentioned doing prison time, running moonshine, being in a gang, and even being a hitman for a terrorist organization who had taken out several intended targets. Rob had the personality of a cult leader to a point where it seemed like everyone believed every word that ever came out of his mouth. I half believed him and half didn't. While the way he told stories seemed very genuine, the stories themselves were as over the top as a Chuck Norris joke. At first, it seemed like Rob was genuinely just trying to be helpful and friendly, and other than being drunk 24/7 due to his alcoholism, he seemed harmless. Boy, were we wrong. Sometimes he would drink for a while, and then get a very dark, emotionless look on his face that I found utterly disturbing. He would go from being a very talkative, animated person to suddenly a stoic, dark, brooding person, and his voice would begin to drop to a lower octave like he was a completely different person. More disturbingly, Rob was always telling Delilah not to trust professional doctors and that she should follow his mental health advice instead. This sent up multiple red flags to me. The thing that began to disturb me the most was that Rob and Delilah seemed to be constantly exchanging secretive glances and always had inside jokes that they had never explained to the rest of us. Delilah was also way too quick to defend Rob's bad behavior and refused to see any of the negative things that were so obvious to Jill and I. It's like Rob had her under some kind of spell. Tom, though not under a spell, did seem to ignore most of Rob's behaviors, and he didn't seem too concerned. Rob's alcoholism, disturbing mood changes, constant drinking, crazy stories, throwing up all over the floor, never showering, and leaving a mess everywhere finally became too much for Jill and I, and we confronted Delilah and Tom about it. We basically told them that we were feeling uncomfortable with all of it, and that it might be best if we all stopped hanging out. They pleaded with us to give them a chance to talk to Rob about it first and bring up his behaviors with them. Fast forward a few weeks, and nothing really changed. Jill and I just kind of gave in because we liked having friends, and we didn't make friends easily. We decided to just deal with Rob's strange behavior and to try not to let it bother us. To try to give Rob a chance, I began to look for signs that there was any truth in his stories. He said that he used to run moonshine, and we literally watched him build a makeshift distillery right in Tom's garage, so I thought maybe that story checked out. Rob mentioned being in a rock band, and I actually found his picture with his band. He also played the guitar and sang for us, and I would say he was decent. Not rock star quality, but decent, like maybe he really had some kind of experience. Rob had mentioned being in prison and learning tattooing, and we watched him actually do a little amateur tattooing. He was pretty bad at it, but he seemed to at least know the basics. As far as the terrorist stuff, I really don't know. No way to prove something like that. Keep in mind, this man was in and out of psych wards, and he could have easily embellished all of these stories. Right as I was just starting to give Rob the benefit of the doubt, something so disturbing occurred that I will never forget it, and it has haunted me ever since. One night at Delilah and Tom's house, Tom and Jill were upstairs watching a movie, and Rob, Delilah, and I were all downstairs just talking in the living room. A few days previous to this, Delilah had actually been talking about multiple personality disorder and how she thought she and Rob had it. When I was sitting on the couch with Rob and Delilah, they brought up the subject again and were talking about their alleged multiple personality disorders. At first, I actually found what they were saying very fascinating, and I began asking them some questions about what it felt like to slip into another personality and if they even realized it was happening. They exchanged a weird glance and turned back to me and told me that the best way to answer my questions was to just show me. I then said, "Well, how are you going to show me? Isn't that something that just happens on its own beyond your control?" Rob replied that there were certain things they could do to summon each personality. I was skeptical and weirded out, but I tried not to show it. I agreed to watch what was about to happen so I could learn. Delilah then relaxed herself and closed her eyes. Rob began to massage her hand in a very ritualistic way, as if they had done this multiple times before. Rob explained that each personality had a name, and he was going to summon them by name. I don't remember what the names were, and I don't care to remember, but after Rob called out a certain name, Delilah began to slowly open her eyes. Her face then contorted to a kind of smirk, and she began to talk like a super confident tough biker chick. That's the best way I can describe it. She started talking to me about how she thought I was cute but too clean cut, and that she wasn't into that. It was definitely a departure from her usual personality. Rob then asked her to summon another personality. Delilah closed her eyes and relaxed for a couple of minutes. When she opened her eyes looked different to me. I can't describe it, like it was no longer her but someone else. She began to softly talk like a shy little girl, and I swear it was no longer her own voice. The voice was so different that I know that I had heard a little girl's voice. Even the best voice actors could not do as good of an impression. She talked very shy and somewhat scared. Delilah would remain in that personality for most of the rest of that evening. Rob got up to use the bathroom, and as soon as he left, I had turned to Delilah and said, "Hey, if this is some kind of joke or you're role-playing or something, can you just let me know or give me a sign?" Delilah replied in that shy little girl voice, "I don't know what you mean. It's me." I remained skeptical, but I didn't want to upset her. I asked about Rob's personalities. The little girl's voice explained that he only had one other personality, and that she was afraid of it. She said that if his other personality shows up, I should try to remain calm and just do whatever he says and not argue or upset him. She then said, "No matter what you see, don't react." A few minutes later, Rob emerged from the bathroom and walked into the kitchen. When he stepped out of the kitchen, he had paused and stared at the wall for a minute, and I watched as Delilah's face began to take a very serious and concerned expression. Rob then slowly turned in our direction, and I saw a face that will haunt me to this day. He had a toothy grin, and his pupils were so dilated that his eyes almost seemed to have turned black. I heard Delilah whisper, "Oh my God, he's here. Remember what I said?" I was now freaking out but didn't dare to move or say anything. Rob walked over and approached Delilah, and in a demonic growl that didn't even sound human, began to belittle her and call her all kinds of demeaning names. Things that you should never call a woman. She then started pleading with him in that sheepish little girl voice, and I watched in horror as Rob slapped her hard in the face over and over. He said, "Remember, this tough love is what saved your ass in the psych ward." She let out a whimper, then fell back into that silent trance that she had been in when changing personalities. Rob then walked right up to me, and I thought I'd piss myself. Keep in mind, this man may have potentially been a hitman like he claimed. All he did was smile and ask in that inhuman growl if I wanted a drink. I obliged out of fear of pissing him off. He soon passed out on the couch. I looked over at Delilah, and I wondered if Rob had knocked her out when he slapped her so freaking hard. She opened her eyes briefly, and she was still in the little girl voice. In a whisper, I asked her if she was okay. She whimpered a little, and she said that she was, and she said she was tired and just wanted to sleep. I let her fall asleep, but I stayed up all night keeping an eye on Rob. Jill and Tom must have fallen asleep to the movie upstairs, but eventually came down and saw that Delilah and Rob were asleep and decided not to bother them. I decided not to bring any of what I had just witnessed up with them. The next morning, Delilah and Rob acted like nothing had happened. I confronted Delilah about it in private, and she told me that she didn't remember anything about that night. She said that she was aware of Rob's bad alternate personality, but didn't remember anything. Rob, of course, is very tough to read, but he acted the same as usual. He never once brought up that night, and he acted super friendly around me like nothing ever happened. During our next few weeks at the house, I had witnessed Rob randomly slip into that demonic personality, and he would slap Delilah on several other occasions if she made a mistake. She would immediately slip into her little girl persona. I finally took Tom and Jill aside, and I told them everything I saw. Tom did not seem too concerned, but Jill was horrified. I confronted Delilah one more time, and she admitted that sometimes Rob scared her a little, but that he showed her tough love at times to break her from her delusions, and that is probably what helped her to get to a point of being able to be well enough to be discharged from the psych ward. I soon realized that there was nothing that Rob could do that would ever change her high opinion of him. Tom said that he had a talk with Rob and that everything would be okay, but Jill and I did not buy it. Jill and I eventually distanced ourselves from them and eventually stopped talking to them altogether. To this day, I don't know if Rob and Delilah were messing with me that night, or if they really were capable of summoning their alternate personalities whenever they wanted. Either way, I really hope that Tom eventually kicked Rob out of the house. Even though Rob started working and helping out with bills, Tom should not have been so trusting and let himself get suckered in. And everything I witnessed and all of Rob's stories, I still don't know what is real and what was a lie. All I know is that before Delilah met Rob, she had never slipped into any alternate personality and never showed any signs of multiple personality disorder. She was in a very vulnerable place at that psych ward after nearly ending her own life, and I feel like Rob took advantage of that. Anyone listening to this who's suffering from mental illness, please contact real professionals for help, and be careful of who you let into your life or let give you advice at your most vulnerable moments.